I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we're bringing you another episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? So, for all of you who are relocating to North Carolina, what are the top 10 things that surprise most non North Carolinians when they move here to buy a new home? Well, first of all, the average home price and the acreage that comes with it. Very often, people have kind of a skewed perception of how cheap it is to buy in the triangle, when in fact, we have one of the strongest markets in the United States. So it's really important that you kind of get a little bit of your feet wet and get a good gauge from your agent on what's going to be doable. I hear a lot that people want to buy 10 acres in Raleigh. That is really tough. Raleigh is predominantly in Wake County, and Wake County can be much more costly than maybe some of our secondary counties. So just make sure that we don't need to tweak some of those parameters. Otherwise, you will be looking at very low inventory, and often those unicorn type properties can come at a very, very high cost. So while we can meet all the criteria and the check boxes, it may not match your wallet. The second one is what conveys. So, in certain states or in certain MLSs throughout the United States, you might actually have to check every box for each individual appliance that you want to convey or stay with the property. Here, this is kind of how it goes. If it's nailed, glued, screwed, bolted, or buried in the ground, it's going to stay. It's considered a fixture. The only ones that don't really fall into this zone would be any type of refrigerator, and that includes like wine and beverage refrigerators and washers and dryers. For the most part, most appliances are considered fixtures. The other asterisk I'll throw in here is a microwave. If it's not built in, then that would also be something that you would need to ask for. The next thing is radon testing. So radon is a colorless, odorless gas that exists here in North Carolina. It's not to get too scientific on you, but it's basically what comes out of the ground from the bedrock. We have a lot of granite here, and it sits because it's heavier than air in the lowest dwelling point of the home. This is actually one of the number one reasons for adult cancer. So it's really important that you test for radon to make sure it's not present. And if it is, then you just need to mitigate it. It's basically like a big fancy fan that you install in your house that takes the radon, sucks it out, and throws it back in the atmosphere. The next one is due diligence. So I've got two different asterisks here on due diligence. One is the deposit, one is the actual doing due diligence, the process. So with the deposit, one of the things that really throws people is the fact that you have to give a very large sum of money to the seller, not to an escrow agent, but to the seller to hold in their bank account until closing. The other thing is, if you choose to walk away, that money becomes theirs free and clear. So some of you are like, but Laura, what if they lied about something? Well, when you have situations where there's a material fact breach, obviously you can argue that, but it's only as good as both parties kind of see with the contract. Obviously, you could take somebody to civil court over getting your due diligence back, but very often you're going to spend more in the fees than you will in the money getting returned. So it can get a little tricky. So make sure that if you were to walk away, even for legitimate reasons, you want to make sure that you're comfortable losing those things. And that includes stuff that maybe the seller didn't know that you now discovered. So this is the next one, the act of renegotiating because new knowledge has come to light. So due diligence, while you have the deposit, you also have the process. So let's say that during our inspections, we find out that the home is riddled with mold. If the home has mold, we would go back to the seller and say, hey, we would like you to mitigate or remediate for the mold that's present. The seller is under no legal obligation to say yes. So you as the buyer, again, even though you may not want to live with the mold, you have to decide, do I want to resolve this on my own post-closing, or do I want to walk away from this house? That is your right, because in the state of North Carolina, you can walk away for any reason at all. However, you lose your due diligence deposit. The next one is the idea that this is an as-is purchase. So while I just spoke about how we try to renegotiate during due diligence, contractually speaking, this is an as-is purchase state, meaning you are agreeing per the contract to take the home in its existing condition when you go under contract. This is also why North Carolina is a caveat emptor state. It literally means buyer beware. So the other thing that we use in order to best prepare ourselves for what we're going to discover is the RPOs. These are our disclosures. And one of the things that also kind of throws people off is it's not just yes and no statements. There's actually a whole column that says no representation. And yes, a seller can check no rep on every single question. Now, should it kind of be a red flag to you? Absolutely. It's very a slim chance that a seller knows nothing about their property. In some cases, you might have a property bequeathed to a family member, or an investor is now offloading it. They've never lived there. So pay attention, take everything with a grain of salt. But the disclosure should give you a good backstory, a good history of the home. So anytime you see that no rep, just know they are allowed to put that. They are within their legal right. The next one is loss of financing. It does not get you your deposits back. We lost that finance contingency a long time ago. It's been 7 years since the state of North Carolina had a finance contingency. So this is very bizarre for people coming from states that is literally a contingency you remove. You have to hit that check and the buyer has to say, yes, we are good to go ahead and go to closing. Here, if you can't close because of financing, you better go find another loan or go dig up a suitcase of cash, because you're still on the hook for that, or you lose those deposits. The next one is that the closing date is what we consider a hard deadline. As we've stated in some other videos that we've done about closing day and all the things that can kind of go awry, one of the other pieces to closing day is there is a clause in our contract that says that either party, so either buyer or seller, has a 7-day window from the agreed upon closing day to actually conduct closing. So why would we even have something like this? Well, sometimes stuff happens at the last minute where there's like a financing issue, or let's say the buyer had a home to sell and now they've pushed their closing back a couple of days, so they need that buffer. The 7-day rule is intent to keep the contract together while all parties are not in breach of contract, and allow it to close within a relatively short time period. So that 7 days used to be 14. They actually shortened it a couple years ago to where it's not used very often, but it does exist to protect both parties. And then the last one is inspections. So again, being an as-is purchase state, you're allowed to do inspections at any given time. You do not waive this contingency. And also, some inspections can only be done at certain times of year. So for example, with your HVAC inspection, if it's super hot outside, we're not going to run the heat. Or if it's super cold outside, we're not going to run the AC. So just keep in mind, the inspections are something that you are allowed to do. You have the opportunity to do. You can't waive those rights here. So, if you have any questions about some differences between your particular state and the state of North Carolina, feel free to drop those in the comments below. I would love to know what conflicts with where you're coming from and some things that maybe caught you off guard while listening to this video. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. We'll see you next time.